Good morning.
In unison, good morning, Your Honor.
In unison, good morning.
You may proceed.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I couldn't hear you. I assume your microphone's on.
I just turned it on. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you. Sergeant Robel, you were going to listen to tapes and compare them to the transcript or do something last night. Did you have a chance to do that?
I went ahead and I looked over the transcripts of Detective Zelis's interview.
Yes.
Okay, regarding the January 19th.
Correct.
And I was not present during that, so my thing is I think Detective Zelis would be able to shed more light on that than me.
And he's going to be here soon, I assume.
Correct.
The transcript does show, however, that you were there. And your position is you were there and then left.
My position is I was there during the viewing of the video. And when the interviews took place with the individual children, I remained outside the room while Mr. Zonin and Detective Zelis conducted the interviews with the kids.
And Mr. Sneddon as well, is that correct?
He was in and out as well. He was in and out, yes.
Alright, we'll talk to Detective Zelis about that. Let me ask you if you had a chance to look at the other things that you were going to look at. You were going to look at, or listen to Neverland's tape. Do you recall that?
Okay, I went over her transcripts more in detail.
Okay.
So if you can refresh my memory regarding exactly what happened.
That's fine. I'd ask that you look at page 28 of Neverland's transcript, and...
Okay, you're talking on the initial one, right, Mr. Sanger? The July interview.
Let me just see here, because the note says page 28. To tell you the truth, now I don't know which one it was. Let me just look here. I think it was the second one.
Second interview.
Hold on. Don't go anywhere yet. No, I think it was the first one.
I'm on page 28 on the initial interview.
Okay, I'm looking at yesterday's transcript, and there must have been. Okay. I'm sorry, I misread it. It's page 24. That's why I couldn't find it. It was line 28 of yesterday's transcript, but it's page 24 of the one I'm asking you to look at right now. That's Neverland's, yes, there it is.
Page 24 on the initial interview.
That's correct.
That's where I am.
Alright, and do you remember? Yesterday I asked you if Neverland told you that Gavin and Star told her the stories, and you said that was true. And then I asked if she had told you. Yeah, it's like one tells me and the other one agrees to it. And I believe you said you had to refresh your recollection either by listening to the tape or reviewing the transcript in order to determine if that's what she, in fact, said.
Yes, I'm looking at that right now, and that is, in fact, what she said.
Okay, and Detective Zelis, in your presence, on that occasion, this being the 7th of July 03 transcript, on that occasion, Detective Zelis said, so are they together when they tell you this? And Neverland says, yeah, most of the time. And Detective Zelis says, most of the time. Okay, is that what actually transpired in that interview?
Yes, it is.
Now, I also asked you if Neverland had, at some point in the interview had told you that she was always by herself at the ranch, and she was not allowed to be with her mother. And you said you were going to check the transcript to see if that's what she said. And I know you're going to ask me for a page on that, and best laid plans.
Well, I went over both of my interviews with her, the initial and also the follow-up. And if you can direct me to a page where it states that, I would appreciate it, because I could not find it, where she said that she wasn't allowed to see her mother. I found something that
alright.
Was close to that.
What page did you find there? You can help me on that. How about that?
I'm trying to find it myself again. It may have been on the follow-up. I thought I had it marked, but I don't. But I did not find it in either one, where she stated that she wasn't able to see her mom.
Okay, but she said something like that she was not with her mom most of the time.
No, what she said is that it was very seldom that she saw her brothers.
Okay.
That she did not see them while at the ranch. Very seldom did she see them, because they were with Michael and they were with each other.
Alright, hold on one second. Let me come back to that, and I'll see if I can find a better quote for you on that, or a page on that. I want to do one other thing here with you, if I can. Is this your witness?
My witness.
Okay, I'm sorry. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
And I'd like to have this document marked next in order. And even if we had some blanks there, if it's all right with the clerk, perhaps we could make this 5036, so it will go with Sergeant Robel's other exhibit. Is that right?
Yes. I'm waiting for the clerk to tell me, because I never know what exhibits you've marked that I don't know about. I only know the ones that you've marked.
That's fine.
That's a good number.
Okay, thank you.
5036.
With the court's permission, Mr. Sneddon has no objection to my putting a blank version of this.
All right.
This chronology up on the, and what's on the overhead is what is also marked as 5036, but the actual exhibit I'm going to hand to the witness, if I may.
How do you want the record to reflect what that exhibit is? What do you want to call it?
It's a timeline from February 1st to March 13th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob, do you happen to have a copy for us? Thank you.
Okay, Sergeant Robel, you've had a chance to look at that for a moment.
Yes, I have.
What you have in your hand, because you haven't written on it yet. I've got it on the board. There are 3 dates that are typed in on this timeline. One is, can I borrow the pointer, if you have it? Bob, right there. Oh, we have our own. Okay, thanks, whoever brought that. Okay, 1, and I don't want to shine this in the court reporter's eyes. So we're okay, right? I'm going from the top. I don't want to do something wrong here. 1 is the 16th. And we have 2 to 16, Brad Miller interview, showing February 2003, the 16th of February, 2003. Is that your understanding of when that taped interview occurred?
I believe it was.
Okay, and then we have 2 to 19 to 2 to 20, which is in the late evening hours of 2 to 19 onto the early morning hours of 2 to 20 when the rebuttal tape was being filmed. Is that your understanding?
Correct.
Okay, and then we have 2 to 20, later in the day, which would be February 20th, 2003, we have the DCFS interview. Is that your understanding of when that occurred?
Yes, it is.
Okay, now, what I'd like you to do, if you would, sir, is put your name once again where it says, witness. And I note last time you say, Sergeant S. Robel, and it looks like it says, 515.
Well, I just put my body number down there.
That's your badge number, or body number, or something.
Body number.
Everybody in the sheriff's department has a different number so you can figure it out.
That's correct.
Okay, alright, now, what I'd like to do, based on your investigation as the lead investigator in this case, is I would like you to, in general, and then I'm going to ask you specifically. But in general, I'd like you to try to put in some of the important dates that you have learned from your investigation in this case, so that the jury will have an idea of what was going on during this February and March period of time. Okay.
Okay.
Alright, and then it will not show up here, but it's going to show up there, and we'll put that up after you finish. First of all, do you know when the Living with Michael Jackson aired in the United Kingdom?
I believe that was on the 4th. 4th or 5th, one of those two. I'm not positive.
Could it have been the 3rd?
It could have been.
I'll tell you what. For now, then, why don't, on your copy, why don't, without directing it to a particular number, since you're not sure, why don't you just, above the general area of the 3rd, 4th and 5th, put, Living with Michael Jackson.
Okay.
And do you know when the Arvizos flew to Miami on Chris Tucker's private chartered jet?
I believe it was the 6th.
Could it have been the 5th? Is there something you can refer to refresh your recollection?
Well, I would like to.
If you have it, could you do that?
I don't have it up here, the timeline.
Do you have a second to confer with the prosecutors? Can you get something that would help you?
Like I said, I don't have it up here.
That's what I'm saying. Do you need a second? Perhaps you could confer with Mr. Sneddon and see if there's something that might help you.
What? Do you want me to testify?
Well, counsel, the way you have to do that, either you're prepared to give him the documents that you want him to testify from or you're not. You don't ask the other side to start producing materials for you.
Well, I didn't mean to. The witness was indicating he thought he had something.
Well, if he doesn't have it, you have to move along to the next question.
That's fine. So in other words, whatever you have, you don't believe you have it in the courtroom. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct. If you have something that would refresh my memory, that would be great.
We'll go over this with other witnesses, then. Do you know the date of the return? The date when Michael Jackson and the Arvizos came back to Santa Barbara and went out to Neverland Ranch.
I want to say I believe it was the 7th.
Okay, February 7th.
February 7th, yes.
So why don't you make a note of that? And just to be clear, as the lead investigator, it's your responsibility to review all of the evidence, including other reports and other things that people have done in this case. Is that correct?
That is correct. But there's so much involved in this, that some of these things, it's been a while since I have reviewed them.
Alright, do you know? So the Arvizos and Mr. Jackson come to the ranch on February 7th. Was it in the evening? Do you recall?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the lack of personal knowledge on the part of the officer as to the date. He wasn't there.
Sustained.
Do you feel you can give us a timeline of essentially? Earlier you testified about some dates in March when you believe the Arvizos were at the ranch.
Correct.
Actually, Your Honor, can I impose an objection? This is really beyond the scope of direct examination. I didn't put this witness on for a timeline, and I didn't think I got into any of this. And he wasn't prepared to testify to it, so I object it's beyond the direct.
I believe on direct he did talk about certain dates and
connected to the search warrant.
If he's not the witness who's able to do this, we will certainly be able to do it. I do think he talked about the March dates earlier.
He did discuss the time when the family had returned from Miami and were at the ranch. The problem I'm having is, after listening to all that testimony yesterday, I'm not sure which one of you asked that question.
I'll tell you what we'll do, because, may I ask a question? And I'll withdraw whatever is pending so I can ask a different question.
Yes.
Alright. Sergeant Robel, as a lead investigator in this case, who do you feel from your department would be best able to present a chronology based on a review of the documents?
Well, the people that were assigned to the case, we all were familiar with the timeline. But there were so many different dates in there, that I'm familiar with it as well as anybody else. But I would like something up here to refresh my memory to make sure I'm correct on the exact chronological events that took place.
And you have those materials, but you don't have them in the courtroom.
I don't have them with me in my binder.
But you do have those materials somewhere.
Yes, we do.
So what I'll do at this point, Your Honor, is I'm not going to ask any further questions on this. I would like to have Sergeant Robel review this, since he is the lead investigator, so he can give us a timeline. And in the meantime, if we can work it out with another witness, we'll do that.
That's fine.
Alright.
Mr. Sneddon, you look like you might want to say something.
Am I allowed?
Well, I have to decide after you start talking.
Judge, I just want to make it clear that I'm not trying to stop Mr. Sanger's cross, but this was not the purpose for this person at this particular point in time. And we had intended to do much the same thing at another point in time, and
all right.
And I don't want to.
I did agree with you, that a lot of what was being asked was beyond the scope of the direct examination. But you didn't object, and I thought that was fine.
I didn't realize we were going to plow this field again today. So I figured it's time to stop.
All right, so are you going to ask? Go ahead, counsel.
I'm sorry. All I was going to do is ask that. I'm going to officially ask, or on the record ask that Sergeant Robel review his materials. And rather than hold us up at this moment, ask that he review his materials and then ask for permission to call him back sometime perhaps later today or tomorrow. I understand there will be other police officers, so we can cover this. If in the meantime Detective Zelis or somebody else can do it, that's fine, too.
Judge, with regard to that request, could counsel and I approach the bench for just a second? It's a personal thing.
No.
That you should be aware of.
No.
Your Honor.
If you're through with this witness, you've asked him to prepare, I'll have him step down. If you're not through, I want you to ask any questions that you have.
I am through with this witness except for the preparation. And I understand what Mr. Sneddon said and will accommodate the witness.
All right.
There is an issue, and I understand, and we'll accommodate him.
You can talk to each other about that.
Fine.
Do you want to have some redirect?
With the court's permission, yes.
All right, go ahead.
Detective Robel, first a couple of easy questions for you. Prior to the time that you were assigned to this particular case, excuse me just 1 second. Prior to the time that you were assigned to this particular case, had you and I ever met?
Prior to the case, no.
Now, I asked you to look at Detective Zelis's report last night, and specifically asked you to review the report with a view as to whether or not that report contained information about the Arvizo children, saying that they had seen the rebuttal tape before your actual first interview with them. Not seen the rebuttal tape, but participated in some interviews that we have now called the rebuttal tape. Did you do that?
Yes, I did.
Did that refresh your recollection?
Yes, it did.
And did you, in fact, have that information prior to the initial interview with the children?
Yes, I did.
Now, on November 18, 2003, you've told the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that you went and participated in the execution of a search warrant that was authorized by a judge of the Superior Court, correct?
That is correct.
On that particular date, was there also an arrest warrant issued by that judge for the defendant, Michael Jackson?
Yes, there was.
I'm going to object and move to strike. Object and move to strike on the grounds of relevance and also beyond the scope of cross.
Overruled. The answer was, yes, there was. Next question.
Now, Mr. Sanger asked you a lot of questions about what you did from after you interviewed the Arvizo family on a couple of occasions until the point that you executed the search warrant on November 18. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, I do.
Now, was there a decision made with regard to how those search warrants were going to be executed?
Yes, there was.
Was there a strategy involved in that?
Yes, there was.
And what was that?
After interviewing.
I'm going to object. This calls for hearsay, and it does not appear to be relevant, and it's beyond the scope of cross.
Doesn't it? Isn't that exactly what you were going into yesterday?
Absolutely.
Overruled.
Go ahead and tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
After conducting the interviews with the Arvizo family, myself, along with the other investigators, including the DA's office, met and we conferred and we decided at that point, like we do on several investigations, sometimes, we'll go in and advance further and interview people to gather more information prior to serving a search warrant. In this case we chose not to, due to the nature of the investigation, and the high-profile case being involved with Michael Jackson. So what we decided to do is drop a search warrant and serve it. And we did it that way because if we were to go out and contact people prior to that, we were concerned about evidence that we were looking for that would corroborate the statements of the children would be destroyed or would not be there, and it would compromise our investigation. So that's the reason why we chose to serve the search warrant. And then after serving the search warrant, or during the search warrant service, I was able to, due to the statements from the children, I was already corroborating some of their statements to me as I was walking through and searching through the house and things that they depicted.
I'm going to move to strike the last part as being non-responsive.
I'm going to strike the last paragraph that starts, and then after serving the search warrant.
All right.
And I'm going to admonish the jury to disregard that statement as a conclusion of the witness.
Your Honor, I don't.
It's non-responsive.
It's non-responsive.
It was non-responsive and a conclusion of the witness.
Yes, sir. All right. Now, Detective Robel, at the time that you executed the search warrant on November 18, 2003, okay. Did you, during the course of the execution of that search warrant you personally, observe items or things that you felt corroborated the statements of the Arvizo children?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
On the date that you executed the search warrant, did you see the mannequin?
Yes.
Did you see the briefcase with the pornography?
Yes.
Object. Yes. Objection. Violates the court's rule.
You didn't say, adult material.
Oh, God. I'm sorry, Your Honor.
All right. Rephrase your question. Sustained.
Well, you think like a lawyer. I really apologize. I apologize to everybody.
Go ahead.
Okay. Did you see the briefcase with the adult material in it?
Yes, I did.
Did you go to the arcade?
Yes.
Did you see the jukebox?
Yes.
Did you go in the cellar?
Yes.
Did you see the wine?
Yes.
Did you go up the stairway to Mr. Jackson's bedroom?
Yes.
Your Honor, I believe this is beyond the scope of cross. I object.
Overruled.
Did you stand on the landing and look towards Mr. Jackson's bed?
Yes.
On the day that the search warrant was executed, simultaneous with the execution of the search warrant, were other search warrants executed?
Yes, there were.
And were there interviews that were done simultaneous off the ranch premises?
Yes.
And who was the person who was interviewed?
Jesus Solis.
Now, don't tell us anything about what was said, because we'll get into that later. But were you informed of the results of that interview while you were at the ranch that morning?
Yes, I was.
Were you present when a search warrant was executed on the residence of Mark Schaffel?
Yes, I was.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that Mr. Sanger asked you this morning and yesterday. You were asked by Mr. Sanger to review some statements with regard to Devellin, and specifically to Devellin with regard to that portion of the transcript where she is describing events where her brothers are present and they're talking about things.
Yes.
Do you recall that?
Yes.
From reviewing the transcript, can you tell the jury more importantly, tell them whether or not, from the review of the transcripts, that she's referring to statements that have occurred on the ranch or after they left the ranch?
I'm going to object. That calls for a conclusion. It's either a statement of the witness or it's not.
Sustained.
Can you tell from a review of the transcript as to when those statements are made?
No.
And just to be clear, the conversations themselves, can you tell when? The conversations she's talking about, when they occurred?
I can tell when they occurred during their stay on Neverland, but exact dates, no.
Now, you were asked yesterday by Mr. Sanger with regard to whether or not Devellin told you that she was aware of the urine bottles incident. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And did you have a chance to go back and look at the transcript with regard to her statements to you about that?
Yes.
And can you tell from a review of the transcript when she was aware of the urine bottles incident?
It was.
Objection. That calls for speculation.
Let me rephrase it, Judge. I can probably help you.
All right.
Can you tell from a review of the transcript whether or not she was aware of the urine bottle specimen while she was at the ranch or?
Yes.
Okay. I just have a couple more. You've told the jury, one of the officers who interviewed Gavin Arvizo in the initial interview and in the follow-up interview, correct?
That is correct.
And during the initial interview, Gavin Arvizo disclosed to you certain things that Mr. Jackson did to him, correct?
That is correct.
Now, can you describe to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what Gavin's attitude or demeanor was at the time that you got into that part of the conversation?
Prior to getting into that area, we were just discussing just his stay on the ranch, and he appeared to be, fine with talking with us, open, very positive. As I got into questioning him regarding the actual molestation acts and having him share with that openly, immediately noticed a major change in Gavin's demeanor, and he basically became very, very quiet, folded his arms, and just sunk down into his chair. And it took me approximately 10 minutes or so to reassure him that he was doing the right thing. And he, at one point in time, kind of got a little choked up. And eventually he was able to go on ahead and disclose what acts occurred.
I'm going to object and move to strike the last sentence as a conclusion of the witness.
Stricken. The jury's admonished to disregard the last sentence.
Now, yesterday Mr. Sanger asked you several questions about statements that Gavin Arvizo made to you about the number of times that he told you that Mr. Jackson molested him. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
And do you recall that on a couple of occasions he told you he thought it was between 5 and 7 times?
Yes.
And do you recall in the courtroom here he indicated that there were at least 2 times that he was very specific about the information in which the defendant molested him? Do you recall that?
Yes.
Do you find any inconsistencies between what he told you and what he said in the courtroom?
Objection. Your Honor, that calls for speculation and comment on a witness's testimony.
Sustained.
Were you present during a conversation where Gavin Arvizo explained the 5 and 7, the 5 figure that he gave you versus the 2 figure that he testified in court?
Yes.
And what did he say in that regard?
Objection. Vague as to time.
It's a.
Overruled. You may answer.
Go ahead.
During my initial interview with him, he had told me that he was specific about 2 events that he recalled occurring. And he also told me that he believes that it happened between 5 and 7 times. And he could not articulate exactly what occurred, but he believes that it happened more than twice.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Recross.
Now, you said you were aware of the rebuttal tape. How were you aware of the rebuttal tape?
During interviews with Mrs. Arvizo.
With Janet Arvizo.
Correct.
You had no idea what the rebuttal tape looked like at the time you talked to Janet Arvizo before November 18th, is that correct?
That is correct.
And you did not ask any of the children about the rebuttal tape prior to the search on November 18, 2003, correct?
I believe that's correct.
May I just put up 5035? That's the timeline that.
Yes, that's fine.
It's already in evidence, just so we have a visual here. Okay, so again, search, November 18th. And sometime after that, sometime between November 18th and January 19th, you saw a portion of the rebuttal video, correct?
That is correct.
And one of the other officers said, "Look at this," and he was looking at it on his screen, and you came over and looked at it.
Yeah, it was a DVD, our video.
Okay, and then the first time you watched the full tape was January 19th, is that correct?
That's correct.
When you first, who was it that showed you this tape, by the way?
Detective Bonner.
Okay, so when Detective Bonner showed you this tape, he called you over and said, "Look at this," right?
Yeah.
And when you first saw, it was rather remarkable, wasn't it?
Remarkable in what way?
I'm asking you. Let me ask you this, then. It did not appear to you at that time to be consistent with what you had been hearing from this family up until the time you saw it.
When I saw bits and pieces of what he showed me on that day, I was not alarmed by that because I recalled what Janet had told me in her initial interview about them being forced to do that by Dieter, so it was not alarming to me at all regarding what I was seeing in the way she was acting, if that's what you're asking.
So forced to say things like, "Call Michael Jackson daddy," and "father figure," and all that.
Exactly.
Okay, and you weren't. You've sat here now, you've seen the cards where that's what this family does. They call people father and mother, and they tell them they love them and they do all that, right?
According to the cards, yes.
You weren't aware of that at the time, were you?
No, I wasn't.
So when she explained, and later the kids explained, "Oh, Dieter made us do it," you weren't aware that that's what they, in fact, did spontaneously prior to ever meeting Dieter, right?
Excuse me.
That was a long question.
It's vague, ambiguous and.
Let me withdraw it.
All right.
I think it was compound, actually. Let me try to break it down. Prior to. Let's put it this way. When did you first learn that this family would send very effusive cards and letters to people calling them mommy or daddy, and telling them they're part of their family, and that sort of thing?
I'm going to object to the question as this family is vague. If he has specific people he wants to refer to, I think he should do that.
I'm referring to Janet, Starr, Gavin and Devellin, whose names already show up on the cards in evidence in this case with regard to Palanker and Michael Jackson.
Just a moment. I don't know how this has deteriorated where both of you are talking freely to the jury about your questions. So let's go back to the.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Let's go back to the specific objections, and not respond to them. The objection is overruled. You may answer now, and I'll have it read back, because there's been a conversation take place.
Thank you. Record read. Upon reviewing, after the search warrant, some of the items that were seized, when I was going through some of those items, I ran across some of the cards and so forth that you have displayed here in court.
Now, the cards to Miss Palanker, you were here in court when those were displayed.
That is correct.
You didn't see those cards until a couple months ago, is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, you indicated that you proceeded. Mr. Sneddon was asking you how you proceeded with this investigation. And basically, you said that you talked to the family and you didn't develop other evidence before going to get the search warrants, correct?
Meaning?
I'm paraphrasing what you were saying, and perhaps not accurately, because you're not agreeing. I believe in response to Mr. Sneddon's question, you said on November 18th, you got search warrants, and you proceeded in that fashion rather than going out and interviewing other people, other than the family, and I guess Dr. Katz, right?
That is correct.
Okay, and I take it from what you were saying, you did that, and I think you specifically said, because this was a high-profile case, correct?
What I meant is that due to the nature of the case being a molestation case, this is not something that, it's out of the ordinary for me, as an investigator, that, on molestation cases, you do not.
I'm going to move to strike. That's a narrative and not responsive.
Overruled. He's answering your question.
Go ahead.
That we take those differently, and each one is dealt with differently as far as how far we pursue it before we do a warrant, because it would compromise evidence that we would possibly lose if we were to go out and contact the people.
Now, you once said that you were concerned about, for instance, calling the Beverly Hills Police Department, didn't you say? Not here in these proceedings, but previously. Were you aware of that? I don't know if you said it or.
I don't know if it was me. I think it was one of the other investigators that was assigned to that.
And you were concerned about calling the Beverly Hills Police Department, why?
Judge, I object. Lack of knowledge, personal knowledge.
That's fine. If you don't know, you're the lead investigator, right?
Just a minute.
Let me withdraw it.
The objection is sustained.
Okay. I'm basing this question on your position here as the lead investigator. I take it, as lead investigator, you have a say, or you discuss with your superiors, that you have a say on what happens in the case, correct?
Mr. Sanger, I have a say in what happens in the case. But the magnitude of this case, I'm the lead, but I don't know every little thing that goes on and gets my approval. So I'm unaware of some things that don't go on a regular basis.
Well, you're aware, for instance, as you have told us, that Mr. Sneddon himself went down to Beverly Hills and did some investigation, correct?
He went down to Beverly Hills. But it wasn't for investigation.
Well, sir, he went to Brad Miller's office.
Just a minute, counsel. I just feel that the examination is losing its focus. Every time he answers something a little differently, you go down that street. And I wonder if you could get back to what you were asking him about originally.
This is.
I don't.
I can indicate to the court.
I think you're taking every side street that comes up, and I'd like you to concentrate on your recross of this witness.
Yes. The recross, and the focus of this, Sergeant Robel, is what you just told us about. You told Mr. Sneddon, this is a high-profile case. That's why you proceeded in this fashion. I asked you about that, and you responded.
Object as a narrative.
Just ask your next question.
All right. And one of the things that your department did, because you said this was a sensitive case, was not contact the Beverly Hills Police Department. Is that correct?
I did not say that, to not contact Beverly Hills. That wasn't me that said that.
Somebody in your department said that. Is that right?
Object as lack of personal knowledge.
If you know.
The objection is overruled. I'll have the question read back, because he added something at the end. Go ahead.
Thank you. Record read. I believe so, yes.
All right. And the reason for that was, you were worried about leaks.
That's correct.
All right. Now, do you have any information whatsoever that the Beverly Hills Police Department would leak information?
Object, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
Sustained.
It's just, yes, or, no. All right. In fact, at that same time period you contacted the Los Angeles Police Department to go see where Mr. Mosley lived or confirm his address, didn't you?
Mr. Mosley.
Mosley. However you say it. I apologize to him, but.
I believe we did.
Okay, and in any event. So sometimes you would, before the 18th, There were occasions when you did make some inquiries and occasions when you didn't, based on your concern about sensitivity. Is that right?
I guess that would be a fair way of putting it, yes.
And on November 18th, you not only got search warrants to search for evidence, but as you just told Mr. Sneddon, you also got an arrest warrant. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So November 18th, you and your department formed the opinion that you had probable cause, you should go out and arrest Mr. Michael Jackson in this case, based on what you had then, right?
That is correct.
And then you investigated the case after you got the arrest warrant.
That's incorrect.
You didn't investigate the case after you got the arrest warrant.
We investigated the case prior to the search warrant. We continued to investigate the case, and we are currently continuing to investigate the case as this trial is going on. This is a continuing investigation.
So a part of the continuing investigation you're just talking about, for instance, is an attempt to discredit witnesses who have come forward to say that the Arvizos are not telling the truth. Is that correct?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this as beyond the scope.
I'm not going to sustain the objection. Go ahead.
Can you repeat that, please? Record read. To discredit, no. It's when we receive reports from you, as the defense, that we have accusations or things in your reports, we're going to go and see if we can interview them to clarify and to make sure that that is correct. And we're also having other people coming forward besides your witnesses that you've talked to that we're following up leads regarding this case.
Alright, when you say, our witnesses, we submit reports to you, part of what our investigators do through our office, right?
Correct.
And give you an opportunity to follow up and talk to them and figure out what's going on, right?
That is correct.
And there have been a couple of witnesses, without going into a lot of detail, a couple of witnesses very recently, who I think have already been referred to, but I think there have been a couple of witnesses who came forward and said they would talk only to both sides at the same time, correct?
That is correct.
And you went down. I think you personally went down once with Mr. Sneddon, once with Mr. Zonin, and interviewed these witnesses, correct?
No, I just went down with Mr. Zonin. I didn't go with Mr. Sneddon.
You're aware that Mr. Sneddon went down on another witness with another investigator, is that?
Yes.
And as to one of those witnesses, you had your officers, as lead investigator, you had your officers, our law enforcement agents, go door to door in the neighborhood to see if people could say anything about the witness who had come forward, correct?
No.
Were you aware that?
I had them go down there and make sure that was the address where that particular person was living. It's part of making sure that we have the right location.
And knocked on the doors, and asked people about their neighbor, the witness, correct?
Correct.
And you ran about a 150-page Equifax credit check on one of the witnesses, didn't you? Or had it done? Is that correct?
A credit Equifax.
Equifax credit check.
I'm unaware of that.
Did you ever run an Equifax credit check on Janet Arvizo or any of the other people that are accusing Mr. Jackson?
We have run backgrounds on everyone involved in this case, whether they're a witness or whatever. That is procedure for us to find out who we're dealing with before we send our investigators out.
Did you ever run an Equifax credit check on Janet Arvizo?
I believe we did.
You did. An Equifax?
I believe so. I'm not sure.
If you find that, would you provide it in discovery to us?
Your Honor, that's argumentative.
Well, but.
Sustained.
Alright, very well. I have no further questions.
No further questions.
All right, you may step down.
Subject to the request that he take a look at those materials.
Well, we'll discuss that. Call your next witness. He's always subject to recall. He's not excused.
Thank you.
Mr. Sanger.
I'll get it. Excuse me.
Detective Zelis.
Please remain standing and raise your right hand.
I do.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
Paul Zelis. Zelis.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Zelis.
Good morning.
You're employed by the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department.
Yes.
And would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how long you've been employed by them?
I've been employed with the Sheriff's Department. Well, I've been in law enforcement for about 12 years. First 4 years was with the Marshal's Office, Santa Barbara, and remaining with the Sheriff's Department.
How long have you been a detective?
Almost 4 years.
And with regard to the investigation involving the defendant in this case, Michael Jackson, were you assigned at some point to be an investigator on that investigation?
Yes.
Do you recall when that was?
It was June the 13th. It was a Friday.
Of what year?
2003, I'm sorry.
All right. And the jurors probably heard this, but we should hear it from you. You participated in some interviews of the Arvizo children, is that correct?
Yes.
And those interviews were videotaped?
Correct.
Now, at some point on November 18, 2003, did you participate in the execution of a search warrant at Neverland Valley Ranch?
I did.
And what was your role in the execution of the search warrant?
To attempt to locate evidence.
And were you assigned to a particular place to search?
Yes. I was assigned to the main house, specifically Mr. Jackson's bedroom.
Any particular place within Mr. Jackson's bedroom?
The upstairs part of the 2-story suite.
All right. I want to show you an item that's in evidence as number 340. Excuse me, counsel. Ask you to take a look at that for just a moment.
That's not 340.
You have not identified that exhibit correctly.
I said 340, Your Honor.
It's not 340.
317.
No, that's the item number.
340 as 2 discs.
You're right. I transposed the numbers. 470.
It hasn't been received in evidence.
Do you recognize that item?
Yes, I do.
It's not in evidence yet.
All right. I'll take care of that right now, Your Honor. The item that's in front of you is 470, is that the right number?
Exhibit number 470.
Let me write that down. I had the wrong number written down. All right. When and where did you see that for the first time?
I saw that during our search warrant on November 18th, and I first located this in the downstairs closet next to the stairway that leads up to Mr. Jackson's bed.
And after you saw it, did you take it into your custody?
I did.
Did you open it?
Yes.
And did you see what the contents were?
Yes.
And what were the contents?
Pornographic.
You can't use that word. I already messed up. It's adult material.
Adult material.
Your Honor,
Sustained.
I'm going to ask the court to explain the significance.
That's fine.
I think I already did tell the jury the significance. Go ahead. By Mr. Sneddon.
Adult material, okay.
Yes.
What did you see inside?
Commercially produced adult material magazines.
And after you had opened it up and observed the contents, what did you do with it?
I gave it to Detective Padilla to be booked into evidence.
Did you give Detective, without saying what you said, did you give him information as to where it was located?
Yes.
And where was Detective Padilla located when you gave it to him?
He was within the downstairs den area of the 2-bedroom suite.
I move that be admitted into evidence, Your Honor.
No objection.
It's admitted.
2 photographs I'm going to hand you. With regard to the first photograph, Your Honor and counsel, I'm sorry. Let me have those back, because one of those is a new photo. The other one's already in evidence. Now, with regard to the first photograph, it's marked for identification purposes, which is 85. Do you see that photograph?
Yes.
And is that photograph an accurate depiction of what it purports to represent?
Yes.
I move that 85 be admitted into evidence, Your Honor.
No objection.
It's admitted.
And with regard to People's 86, do you recognize that photograph?
Yes.
And as that's already in evidence. Do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph?
Yes.
And where was that when you first saw the items depicted in that photograph?
I pulled it out of the closet as depicted in exhibit number 85. I pulled it outside the closet in an area of the floor that I could open it. Opened it and had a picture taken of it.
Your Honor, may we have the Elmo turned on, please? Alright. With regard to the photograph that's depicted on the Elmo above, what does that show, Detective?
What exhibit is that?
This is 85.
Thank you.
It shows the briefcase in its original location within the closet.
And where was that closet located?
It was directly next to the stairway leading up to the upstairs bedroom area.
And now I'm going to put 86 on the board. With regard to the exhibit 86, does that depict the condition of the briefcase when you first opened it up?
Yes.
Did you personally go through and inventory all the items inside the briefcase at that time?
No.
So what did you do after you opened it up and looked at it?
I had forensics take a picture of it, and I closed it, sealed it, and booked it into evidence.
Okay. We can take that down. Alright. I've shown you a photograph, number 75, which is in evidence, I believe, Madam Clerk. That's what it says on the tag, so do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph?
Yes.
Alright. And what is that?
It is the upstairs bed area of the two-story suite.
Is that the area in which you were conducting your search?
Yes.
Now, do you see anything depicted in that photograph that contained items that you seized on that day of November 18?
No.
Okay. Did you seize things from other areas of the bedroom?
Yes.
Where?
In a nightstand directly opposite of this picture that's on the right-hand side of this.
I got the wrong picture. Okay. We'll correct that.
Okay.
That was a test. Alright. The next photograph that's in front of you, the number on that is
338.
Is that in evidence?
Yes.
Alright. With regard to 338, when and where was the first time that you saw the item depicted in that photograph?
I located this photograph of the children in the nightstand, as I previously mentioned, to the right of the bed, in the bottom drawer.
Okay. Would you turn that one over, if you would? The next photograph, the number on that is
83.
And that, I believe, is not in evidence. Do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph?
Yes.
And is that photograph an accurate depiction of what it purports to represent?
Yes.
Move it be admitted into evidence, Your Honor.
No objection.
It's admitted.
And the next photograph, Officer, Detective.
285.
With regard to 285, do you recognize that?
Yes.
And is that an accurate depiction of what it purports to represent?
Yes.
I move that 285 be admitted into evidence, Your Honor.
Is there any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right. It's admitted.
We're going to need the Elmo again, Your Honor. All right. I'm going to have exhibit number 338 put up on the Elmo. Now, do you recognize that photograph?
Yes.
And where was it the first time you saw it?
Located within the second bottom drawer of the nightstand to the right of the bed.
Now, with regard to that particular exhibit, 33, with regard to the photograph depicted in the photograph 338, what did you do with that photograph?
I had it booked into evidence.
And do you recognize the people in that photograph?
Yes.
And had you met them prior to the execution of the search warrant?
Yes.
And you say you had it booked into evidence. Would you describe to the jury what you did with regard to this particular item to get it processed and booked into evidence?
I provided it to Detective Padilla, who was gathering all the evidence and taking note of who located it and where it was found.
All right. Now, we're going to put the exhibit 83 on the board. Do you recognize what's depicted in the exhibit 83?
Yes.
And with regard to that particular exhibit and the magazine, did you direct that photograph be taken?
Yes.
By whom?
Forensics.
And when and where was that magazine the first time you saw it?
Just as you see it there inside the drawer.
So that's exactly where it was before it was touched.
Correct.
All right. Do you recall how many magazines that you found of a similar nature in that particular drawer?
An exact amount, I don't. But I know there were several. Exact amount, I don't know. I know there were several.
Oh, several. I couldn't hear the last word. Okay. Thank you. All right. You can take that down. I'm going to place 285 up on the board right now and ask you if you recognize it when it gets cleared up. All right. 285, do you recognize that?
Yes.
And did you play a role in having those items displayed on the bed?
Yes, I placed them there.
And were you present when the photograph was taken?
Yes.
And where are the items that are depicted in that photograph? Where did you obtain them from?
These were all items located in the bottom drawer of that nightstand.
All right, you can take that down. Your Honor, may I have just a moment to get the right photograph?
Yes.
All right, I think we can clarify this. I've handed you a photograph that's marked as People's 77, is that correct?
Correct.
And People's 77, do you recognize that?
Yes.
Now, does that photograph depict the location of where you found the items that you just testified about?
Yes.
All right, that felt pen, is that still up there somewhere?
No.
No. No, it isn't, because I took it. Now, on the exhibit People's 77, okay. I want you to just put your initials on the location of the item of furniture which you obtained those magazines in the photograph.
Okay.
And what have you put on the photograph?
My initials, PZ.
All right, thank you. During the course of the time that you executed this warrant, did you see a mannequin in the room?
Yes.
And where was the mannequin when you saw it for the first time?
In the upstairs bedroom area of the two-story suite.
And when you saw the mannequin, what did you do with it?
I booked it into evidence.
So this was another item that you took down and gave to Deputy Padilla.
Detective Padilla, yes.
Detective Padilla.
Yes.
Can you just generally describe what the mannequin looked like?
It's a mannequin. Life-sized mannequin of an 8-year-old Afro-American girl.
Okay. Now, during the time that you were processing these pieces of evidence, were you wearing gloves?
Yes.
During the course of the search that day, did you see anything that looked like some kind of a folding chair or a futon of some kind in Mr. Jackson's room?
Yes.
Would you describe where it was and what it looked like to you?
It was actually to the right of the right nightstand where I've located these items. It was like a little cushion seat. I think you can fold it out. I'm not quite sure of this, but it looked like the type that could be folded out and slept on.
I'm going to move to strike based on speculation, Your Honor, the last part.
Sustained. And it's stricken.
Your Honor, at this time I have one other exhibit I'd like to have marked for identification purposes, which is 561. And it's a brown bag with the number in black at the top, 365, and its contents.
All right.
Detective Zelis, I've handed you an item that's marked as, I forgot the number. What's the number? 571.
561.
561. Do you recognize that bag?
Yes.
Would you please take the item out of the bag? Do you recognize the item you took out of the bag?
Yes.
When and where was that the first time that you saw it?
I saw this in the upstairs bed area of the two-story suite.
And what did you do with it after you saw it?
I seized it and had it booked into evidence.
Do you remember specifically where upstairs it was?
It was over by this chair that I described on top of some books, or some boxes, I should say.
Okay. I need a moment, Your Honor. Your Honor, it's time for a break and we have a minor thing to straighten out. So that would be better than doing it in front of the jury and you.
All right, let's take the break.